because I love running, I was looking forward to running around the seawall. And Stanley Park, my son was out here this week and he said, you've got to go running in Vancouver. Like everything's lit up right now. The blossoms are just amazing. And but anyway, I missed my flight yesterday and they put me on a later flight, but still was able to get here like 6 or 7 last night and do a run around Stanley Park. And then got to Denman there and I saw the palm trees and I thought, that's kind of like rubbing it into the rest of Canada. Like, what is this palm tree thing? Like, who else has palm trees? Lord. We are an organization that is very often brought in when senior leaders are sitting and looking at an engagement report and trying to figure out, what do we do with this? We've been on a journey for 4 or 5 years and we've been doing these engagement surveys. In the first couple of years, we just went at the low-hanging fruit and our employees got back to us and said, thank you for listening and you're taking action. But you know what, over the last couple of years, things have started to kind of plateau, and now actually our employees are starting to get a little cynical. Is concrete, visible action really going to happen or not? And so often we're brought in to help senior leaders understand how they can address engagement in meaningful ways inside the employee's world. And we kind of feel like organizations are like smartphones. When they're charged up, when they're energized or juiced, it's a lot easier to be efficient and effective. But when they run out of juice, some of the most important calls don't get made. And some of the most important messages don't get sent. So I want to take you through just a few thoughts around energy today and why it is that we would actually look for something beyond engagement. As good as engagement is there something beyond engagement, especially in our environment this morning, that links to our ability to create organizational health, where wellness and energy can actually serve each other? So I want to ask that question. Here's issue number one that we've seen. Across Canada for sure, I would say across North America, we are seeing more and more employees and managers, and I would say especially managers, and they're engaged, but they're not energized. So they're engaged. They're going to say good things about the organization. They're going to stay, and they're going to strive to do their best work. So they're soldiering on. But the issue is they're not energized anymore. And we're seeing more and more of this. And so is there something about engagement that's actually producing this type of environment? When you take a look at the executive brain functions, prioritizing, strategizing, innovation, problem solving, going into conflict, those are the brain functions that actually create the most value in an employee or a manager's day. But if you take a look at the human brain, it's kind of interesting. Your brain, it only comprises 2.5% of your body weight. But how much energy does your brain burn? 25% of the glucose or energy that your body uses is consumed by your brain. So if we don't have enough energy and our energy stores are running low, then those executive functions like prioritizing and innovation and strategizing and stepping into the difficult conversations, we go, I just don't have what's needed. You'll be driving into work thinking about, I've got to have that difficult conversation with that person this morning. But you look at your energy level and go, it's not going to happen today. Right? And so the value-adding parts of your day demand the most energy. So if your energy is beginning to flag, you will actually resort to those non-value-adding activities like email. And we will dither. I know this as an author, that there are things that I need to be stepping into, and you have to know the inner critic is just plaguing you as an author. What do you have to say? Who wants to read anything? And so as you sit down in front of your computer, you know that this is a value-adding activity, putting your thoughts down. But if the energy level is not where it needs to go, I will tell you, I'll organize my workspace, or I'll move stuff around. So energy is pretty critically important. So the first strategy inside Beyond Engagement is, let's help leaders shift from managing engagement to managing energy. And the good news is, there are markers that you can determine inside an organization which will very clearly indicate whether a department, whether an individual, whether an organization is energized or not. And so what we're working with organizations with right now is the ability to do frequent pulse checks to determine if a department is energized or not. Something that can be filled in 2 minutes on a handheld device, so that we can get a clear sense of where is the energy gauge, where's the energy dial in an organization. Here's the second issue around engagement. Employees have begun to see it as a con game. Blessing White is one of those organizations amongst Gallup and Towers, Perrin and Hewitt, etc. But one of their big things is, if employees do not see concrete visible action as a result of the engagement survey, they begin to get very cynical and jaded. And the narrative that goes on around the cafeteria is, the engaged person is sitting there who, again, they're soldiering on, they're going above and beyond the call of duty, they're going the extra mile, and their colleagues who've been down that path look at them and say, go ahead, knock yourself out. You'll sacrifice your marriage, you'll sacrifice your relationship with your kids, you'll sacrifice your health, and what will you get? More work. And no recognition. Now, I know that's a jaded, very jaundiced view, right? But that is the narrative that begins to emerge when leaders don't step in and take action in meaningful ways to our engagement surveys. So that cynicism has nothing to do with organizational health and everything to do with organizational decay. So we are all about lifting the manager's burden. And here's the deal. Managers, after an engagement survey occurs, they take on the load on their own shoulders. I need to motivate people. I need to be better at inspiring people. I need to be better at helping people understand the big picture and our strategy and my expectations of people. And they take on a load that's unsustainable. And there are two truths about energy that all of us know. Energy is finite, and energy is renewable. Because energy is finite, a manager can only give so much on any given day. But because energy is renewable, there are things that we as managers and leaders can do that will actually create that renewal inside of ourselves and our employees. But it has everything to do with, how do we help employees step up as partners and own their own engagement? And shifting managers and leaders from parenting to partnering is a big piece of our work. Because unwittingly, as managers and leaders, we can slip from partnering, which is what this work is supposed to be about inside an organization, into subtle ways of parenting. So there are those energy checks. We look at 10 things. I'm growing, I'm achieving great results, I find meaning at work, I connect with my manager, I fit, I'm clear, I'm supported, I'm valued, I'm inspired, I feel energized. So an employee on their handheld device can literally fill that out in 2 minutes. We were working with a big hospital in the States, and their mandate was they had 3 hospitals moving right into their neighborhood that were very, very intent on drafting away their best talent, their best surgeons and nurses. And so the CEO said to me, looked me right in the eye and said, can you build a firewall around our best talent? That's not a bad, right? Not a bad mandate. And so what we did was we taught them how to manage energy and how to do these frequent pulse checks, and we taught their managers how to engage employees as partners. And it was very, very interesting because after 18 months, they had a 22% reduction around the intent to leave. So and that went on over time as well. So if we drive for energy, we actually achieve a lot of the other markers that are important to us. Revenue, quality, safety, profitability. But if we drive for engagement, we don't always necessarily hit those other markers. Here's that parenting piece. Unwittingly, we actually slip from partnering into parenting because we want to fix these engagement scores. And it's classical colonialism, right? That's the history of the world, is that one group steps into the territory of another group and impinges their values on that group. We see it in development of the third world, where we've spent $2.3 trillion over the past 50 years. And the countries who have received the most aid have been helped the least. And the countries that received the least aid have progressed the most. And the issue is, the way that we give aid inside the third world has everything to do with a colonizing approach. It's very paternalistic. It's very patronizing. And if you take a look at patronizing and paternalistic, the root is the same. There's something that you're missing that I need to provide. And this is what we have to address inside our leaders and our managers, is getting away from this parenting and go into partnering. I'll give you a quick story about this, working with a large financial institution here in Canada, and they had large tracts of their customers that were not being contacted. Inside of a financial institution, that's a big issue. And their RMs, the relationship managers, just didn't have the capacity to do that. So they thought, we will offload that onto our CSRs, our customer service representatives. But the issue was, the CSRs weren't stepping into that. And so there was a story that was emerging at head office. The story was, CSRs are just resistant to change. They're just fearful about having those conversations. And so we just need to put the ultimatum and give the mandate and get them to comply to that. Well, one of the managers that we were working with, she had a different interpretation to what was going on, and she thought, I'm going to crisscross the country and I'm going to find out, is there something getting in the way? And so she began talking with CSRs across the country, and in the process of that, she was trying to draw out what's really going on inside their world and how can we help with that. So we had a meeting with her at dinner, for dinner in Guelph, and she was saying, how do you get to what's going on underneath the surface? And we said, well, one of the questions that we use a lot, and helping managers ask this question, is what matters most? Just getting to the conversation and starting to ask, what matters most to you in your day? What matters most to you in your job? And when people can get to what matters most, you can really understand what are the things that energize people and what's the interference of getting in there. Anyway, she was dealing with one particular CSR, and she started asking this question. And what she found out was very interesting to her, because this person used to be an RM. So she had specialized knowledge about how to approach customers. No need to be fearful of the questions that she might be asked. But she was not stepping into these conversations and contacting customers. Why not? What she understood was this person, although they used to be an RM and now had a child and didn't want to be on the road as much, she was now a CSR. And she said, if I become the poster girl for customer contact, I will be rejected by the rest of the team. And this manager found out that inclusion and acceptance and belonging was the thing that mattered the most to this CSR. And she walked through a very simple 30-minute coaching conversation that reframed this thing so that this CSR could find a way of actually providing the service that she wanted to customers without being alienated from the rest of her team. So 6 weeks later, we got an email from the VP of customer experience, and I still save this email to this day because it said, this particular CSR has unlocked $7 million worth of business for us. And then he said, it's not a typo, $7 million. And there were other results from other CSRs by asking this question, what matters most? Not a bad question to ask. I'm actually going to skip this piece right here. But this shows us a little bit of how we can slip from partnering into parenting. When we are looking at the organization's needs and the employee's needs, there is something in our brain as human beings that is highly reactive to threat. And we're wired this way. That if we feel threatened, if we feel a little bit insecure, we go binary. We go binary. It's either all or nothing. It's now or never. You're either with me or you're against me. And so when we deal with the organization's needs or the employee's needs, we will tend to buckle one way or the other. The most difficult thing as a manager, as a leader, is to stand right in the middle of those two. And how do we harmonize the competing needs between the organization and the employee? If we can't have the emotional intelligence and the energy of standing right in the middle of that tension, we will begin to overpower and demand without understanding the implications inside the employee's world, or we will comply and give in to the employee's needs at the expense of the organization's success. So we want to figure out a different way, and that is, how do we harmonize those competing needs? And this is some of the types of parenting that begins to emerge. The challenging parent, the nurturing parent, the distant parent. I think that in Canada anyway, what we see is more of our managers are going into that comply zone, where they actually take the load of the employee on and become over-nurturing. So that's that shift. Our current approach to tension, they're not fixing the engagement issues. There is something right inside tension that we absolutely have to create the results that we want. So from a physics point of view, when you have tension, you have what? Energy. Wherever you have tension, latent and resident inside that, innate to tension is energy. You don't get to decide whether energy will be released from the tension you have with another person in your organization. It will be released. You do get to decide whether it will be creative, innovative energy, or whether it will be destructive energy. So our work with leaders is really, how do you help leaders with the emotional intelligence to, when they see tension, when they sense tension, to move towards it rather than to avoid it or overpower it or comply? And then how do we draw out what matters most, harmonize those competing needs, and release that creative, innovative energy? That's the big, big part of work that we do. When you think of where tension comes from, it actually comes from this what matters most piece. At the individual level and at the functional level in terms of department, there are things that matter most to sales that are very different than what matters most to operations. And it creates business tensions that are just epic. So when we think about those driving needs, think about this for a second. These driving needs are like oxygen to us. So you're visiting your friend in the hospital, and she's had an accident and her lungs have been compromised, so she's got an oxygen mask on and an oxygen hose is trailing off the side of the bed. you're sitting here talking to your friend, just visiting with her, and her Aunt Betty bustles into the room. Now, God bless Aunt Betty, but she's a little bit smothering. She pulls up her chair to the side of the bed and goes, "Darling, how are you doing?" And her elbows are resting on the bed. Unwittingly, her elbows are resting on your friend's oxygen hose. And you see your friend, the face start to change color, and she's struggling. How many seconds will it take for your friend to respond and say something to Aunt Betty? Or forcibly remove her? Not long, right? Oxygen is not a preference. Oxygen is these needs are like oxygen. You know, anybody who's read Viktor Frankl would know, he says, man's search is not a search for happiness. Man's search is a search for meaning. Those people who, as a psychotherapist, he was interred in Auschwitz, and he saw people who were feeble and frail and thought, they'll never make it through. But they did make it through all the atrocities, all the deprivation, all the torture, and at the end of it all, he found out the reason they made it through was this. They had a piece of work they had to finish. They had a relationship they had to get back to. And Viktor Frankl quoted Nietzsche and who said, "He who has a why can bear with any how." Because meaning and purpose and the why is like oxygen to people in the workplace. And there is an incredible renaissance right now of why, the power of why. This piece right here, every person has to feel like they have significance, they have self-worth, they have self-esteem. If we take that away from people, you can imagine that it's just like their oxygen hose is being crimped. Think of Tunisia, Syria, Libya, Egypt over the past year and a half. This next driving need, you can only take this away from people for so long before they will take unbelievable risks. What is this next driving need that is just like oxygen? Freedom. Freedom. Every employee has to have that sweet spot of enough autonomy and decision making and enough guidance and direction and coaching. Dan Pink's work around drive says that autonomy and freedom very, very critical. And this next one, you'll know this for some of you who are into wellness, that belonging in close social relationships is a stronger predictor, a better predictor of someone's physical health than whether they smoke, whether they exercise, and the quality of their diet. Now, those are big predictors of someone's physical health. But belonging in close social relationships, we know the studies of babies who are receiving all the clinical care, but when they don't receive any emotional connection, they begin to decay. And the research over the past 10 years is showing that if you see someone who is alienated, isolated, lonely, you look at all the markers, blood pressure, hypertension, arteriosclerosis, etc., and they are a person who is beginning to decay. Belonging is not a preference. It is a driving need. And finally, as I said, there's a part of our brain that is highly reactive to threat. So take a look at these driving needs for a second. What happens if they're not met? So let's just take a look at some different types of behavior. Here's a person who checks out, becomes very cynical. Here's a different type of behavior. This person takes the credit, very critical of others, posturing, political. This person abuses policies, a maverick, breaks the rules, doesn't return emails and isolates herself, himself. This person complains, gossips, creates cliques, exclusive relationships that nobody else can get into. And finally, this person here micromanages, controls, CYA behavior, finger pointing, blaming, accusation. So what do these clusters of behaviors all have in common, beside the fact that they're toxic and counterproductive and bad for teamwork? What do they have in common? Take a look at that, right? An unskillful expression of an unmet need. an unskillful expression of an unmet need. So if we think about this person who is cynical, hypercritical, sarcastic, uses dark humor, checked out, this is a person who has a valid human need for meaning. They see the mission statement on the wall, they see people not walking the talk, and they become very jaded, very cynical. And it's easy to look at this type of person and go, they're just not a team player. I don't know if they're really good for the culture. And if we don't ask the question, what matters most, we can miss the point completely. If you take a look at this person who takes the credit, doesn't recognize others, one-upper, always right, political, have a valid human need for, shout it out. Significance. This person, the maverick, doesn't follow through, unreliable, takes unwise risks, has a valid human need for freedom. Absolutely. This person, wishy-washy, people pleaser. We tend to gossip and complain in order to get belonging. Belonging. It's a valid human need. Too bad it's being expressed in such an unskillful way. And finally, this micromanager, she's not micromanaging because she's so buttoned down and organized. She's micromanaging, or he's micromanaging because he has a valid human need for security. It's just being expressed in an unskillful way. If this is true, then I think what we can do is, when we see those types of behaviors in an organization that do not produce wellness, that are not good for organizational health, we can ask ourselves two questions. Number one, what's the unmet need that matters most to that person? And secondly, what's happening in the environment that causes them to believe that that need can't be met? So think back to your friend in the hospital. You go visiting your friend the next day. And once again, at a certain moment, Aunt Betty comes in. And as Aunt Betty is pulling her chair up beside the bedside, what is happening inside your friend? What's happening? Anxiety. Does the anxiety have anything to do with oxygen deprivation at this point? No. What does the anxiety have to do with? The anticipation of it. The fear that Aunt Betty will crimp the oxygen hose. So take a look at this. This is organizational life. We now have 5 needs that matter more to people than anything else, and 5 sets of beliefs around those needs. From, in terms of meaning, there is purpose. Right over to the other end of this is futile. I can't change things. I'm stuck. Right? If you take a look at significance, every person's got a belief system that says on one end, I have no worth. Right over to the other end, I have worth. Freedom. There are people who have a belief, you know what? I will be trapped. I will be the victim. I will be left holding the bag. Right over to the other end, I am free. So now we have to figure out, how do we do conversation in an organization in such a way that we get to what matters most? And usually what matters most to you might be a little bit different than what matters most to me. How do we harmonize those competing needs? A couple more thoughts and I'm going to close off here. This piece here I just want to leave you with. Oftentimes, engagement initiatives seem to be calling for more effort. And in fact, that's very explicitly what we're asking for. It's about more discretionary effort. People being engaged so that they will go above and beyond the call of duty, go the extra mile. But what percentage of the time is a lack of effort a real problem? When there's a performance issue, what percentage of the time is it that people are just not trying hard enough? Now, I know that there's a percentage of the employee population that may be true. They're just not trying hard enough. But is that the preponderance of the organization? What do you think? That they're just not trying hard enough. What we see is the largest percent of the organization, that's not the issue at all. There's something else going on. So let's take a look at that. Here's Lindsay. We hired her because she's got unbelievable education, skill, talent, checked her references, and everybody says she's got a fantastic work ethic. She has just got great character, lots of integrity. And so you would think that with all of that, performance is going to be a slam dunk. You just put her anywhere in the organization, she's going to flourish, right? So Lindsay equals performance. But we know that that's not always true. So we were doing some work with a bunch of healthcare leaders across Canada. And one of them was a chief nursing officer. And she said, most of our surgeons are pretty great, but we've got one ER surgeon in our hospital, technically brilliant, gets great results in the ER, of the operating room, but is egotistical, barks out orders, impatient, demeaning, throws beepers and charts, uses profanity. And we've got nurses like Lindsay who are talented and engaged and knowledgeable. And when they work with that particular surgeon, they're so on edge that they make dumb mistakes. Can you see this? So here's what it is. Lindsay divided by interference equals performance. In this particular case, the fear of being kind of torn apart psychologically in front of your peers is causing her to doubt she has got self-doubt. She's second-guessing her decisions. And in the moment, her performance suffers because of interference. So if you think about it, take a look at some of these forms of interference. Fear, self-doubt, unresolved tension on a team, people feeling unappreciated or unrecognized, underperformers who are not dealt with. And you know what happens there. The high-performing employee takes on the extra load. And over time, after having gone the extra mile, and that person who sits beside them in the next cubicle isn't being addressed, they begin to begrudge that. They begin to become resentful. And that shows up inside their mind day after day as interference. And we know there are things that can actually multiply. If everything I just talked about there divides and fractionalizes Lindsay and her ability to access her knowledge and her talent and her skills, there are things that can multiply her. And so getting into a state of flow. Some of you may know the work of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, being able to get into a state of flow, helping people come to insights. So managers who have an employee that comes to them with a problem, instead of giving the solution, they say, what have you thought of so far? Finding the autonomy sweet spot, I talked about that, connecting with the bigger why, being recognized in a meaningful way. So we look at it this way, inside of an organization, that every employee times energy divided by interference, that's the performance. But you don't know how to energize that person, and you don't know how to remove interference for that person unless you find out what matters most. And so going into those very simple conversations across the organization as we work with each other as partners is how we release energy. And at that point, I'm going to turn it over to Roy.
Thank you very much, Brady. Join me in thanking Brady.